This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, I'm gonna start this voice note. I'm sending you on weather watch like you normally do, but in this instance, as is in the instances where you say, of course, it's a fucking glorious day in September. Lucky to get this type of sunshine, and it's got that lovely autumn kind of breeze as well, and the changing of the leaves and whatnot. So yeah, beautiful that we're getting this in September. Sometimes we don't. As I'm walking in the park now, a lot of people set up in tents. I guess they live here now, but more power to them. So, we watched The Coffee Table last week. Thought I'd go for a pretty chill movie this week in Failsafe, which isn't a chill movie at all. Directed by Sidney Lumet. I'm hoping that's how you pronounce his name. If not, it'll be would that it were so simple for the next 15 to 30 minutes. But yeah, it's funny with someone like Sidney Lumet or anyone that's had a career that started long before you were born. When you're doing a retrospective after the fact, you see all the touchstones and the pillars. Obviously, I'm well familiar with Dog Day Afternoon. I'm very familiar with Serpico. Love both of those movies. And then there's movies that have been on my list of quote-unquote old movies that it's hard to watch old movies sometimes, isn't it? Just the idea of it, even though they're so often more rewarding than the Netflix movie of the week. Obviously, movies like Network, you've recommended, is on my list. Didn't realize Sidney Lumet did that. Been thinking of doing a Wizard of Oz retrospective before Wicked starts up in a few months' time. And I was going to watch Return to Oz and even The Wiz. Turns out he done The Wiz as well. I've got Paul Newman downloads on my laptop. Been thinking of watching The Verdict for a while. Turns out he did that as well. So he's very much a guy that's in my sphere. And there's movies that I've seen of him that I absolutely love. 12 Angry Men as well as another one that's absolutely fantastic. So it's interesting that a movie like Failsafe that I wouldn't even hear of ends up on my desk when I saw someone talking about it. I think it was on Letterboxd. And I wonder, will this happen with someone like Christopher Nolan as well, when maybe someone our age in about 40 years time hears about this great director, Christopher Nolan. They're going to be pointed to Oppenheimer. They're going to be pointed to Dunkirk. They're going to be pointed to all these quote-unquote prestige pictures and maybe the Batman trilogy. And then there's going to be movies like The Prestige that will get lost in that filmography when someone's looking back, when they have the whole weight of cinema at their disposal and they're trying to make choices on what to watch. The Prestige, for me, is his best movie, and it's going to get lost. Perhaps. I don't know. So The Failsafe, I hadn't heard of. And it's a good movie. Now, I wouldn't put it up there with the likes of Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon, but it is a movie that should be seen, I think. And what I found really fascinating about it as well is that it's almost a precursor to a disaster movie. And these kind of Armageddon movies or Deep Impact movies like that, it has that setup and that feel to it. And there's a time not so recently with the Cold War that probably ended while we were born, but at the same time something that really didn't affect us. But I often hear about it through maybe the pop culture of the time after the fact. Like Bob Dylan has a lot of songs talking about the bomb going off and the Cold War, and everyone having that same dream of, or nightmare rather, of a nuclear bomb killing them in the middle of the night. So you can really imagine what it's like to live under that pressure and live under that type of anxiety. Like, it's something that I can't really get my head around, but it was a big part of people's lives for a very long time. And I think this movie does a very good job of capturing the anxiety of that and capturing the mood at the time, which it's hard to do, and is a lot of filmmakers struggle with that, I think. But a lot of Sidney Lumet movies, they have a lot to do with social injustice and the psyche of various things going on at the time. So should be no surprise. But yeah, going back to the structure of this, it's building a disaster movie around the structure of the fear of the Cold War and fear of that impending doom that obviously didn't actually happen in the end, thankfully. But yeah, this movie starts off, and you can see how this is tightened in later movies and refined. But if you know, we talk about the language of cinema a lot. If you know the language of cinema, you're right at home with the earlier version of this type of tale. We open up with this really trippy, very different dream sequence. I don't know if some animation was used. You might know a lot about the history of animation compared to me. But you get this very strange, off-putting dream sequence that's very good. And then we get this general waking up, and it's this dream of a matador and people in a coliseum, and the matador ultimately kills the bull, although we don't really see the matador killing the bull, obviously, because it's a little bit impressionistic and doesn't follow maybe cohesive logic in the same way that lots of dreams don't follow cohesive logic. And that's the opening scene. We're introduced to this general type character. He's definitely a soldier. I don't know how high up he is or what exactly his story is, but that's where we're introduced to him. And then we're introduced to Walter Matthau, who we're familiar with from, or at least I am, Grumpy Old Men, The Odd Couple, is it? Seen a few clips of that here and there. And then the movie, what is it? Dennis the Menace? Can never remember which one it is. So he's pretty good in this role. Apparently I think he's got some Academy Awards for other stuff, or at least nominations. So maybe this was known at the time. And obviously looking back, you see a guy later on in these comedy movies. You don't know fully what he's capable of, but thought he was very good in this. And we're introduced to him at this dinner party where he's waxing academically about the type of war, and on a very thought experiment type basis, where, oh, how many lives can we lose, and oh, how many would you sacrifice? You know, these type of insufferable dinner party talks. Mind you, some of these conversations are quite good intellectual conversations anyway, but just how they used a lot in movies of these intellectual snobby types, and he's at a dinner table and then he basically swoons this woman and she says, give me a lift back, and then he smacks her at one point to stop her making a pass on him. And I see this so often in old movies where it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna smack this woman. Makes me wonder how common it was in these movies, or in real life, should I say, considering it happens in these movies, like, bam, that's right, I smacked my woman. I'd love to know how audiences thought about it at the time. But anyway, that's a side thing. We're meant to infer that this guy is... I don't think we're meant to like this guy. I'd say this is a film with no bad guys, but lots of bad decisions. But at the same time, take your poison. It's like in horror movies where we each have a character who gets slashed up that we like the least because of just one personality attribute. That's enough for us to dislike him. And in this, I had enough of Walter Matthau in that opening scene. And all these scenes are taking place at different places across America. We get the timestamp, and then we're introduced to this other soldier character that's, I think, living with his alcoholic dad, and it looks like a pretty shitty apartment to live. And yeah, so we're getting all these pieces in place for later on, like all these good disaster movies kind of do. We move a lot of pieces on the chessboard. So I was right at home with that. And then we're introduced to something that's explained to us that, you know, will come back to form the central kind of device of this movie. And that is, we're introduced to this war board, or war screen, I guess you could call it, where we're shown the planes of the Allies and the border of the Russians, and these points along the map where it's explained to us that if the Allies don't get an order to turn around past this point, they're going to continue on to bomb Moscow. And it's explained to us, and we'll walk through it as an audience, that could never really happen because everything is locked down. So it's a pretty damn good system. But of course, you know that it isn't locked down, and this is going to come back to... I hope it's not too windy now. I'm having a nice walk over these woods. Yeah, so we know this is going to come back and haunt us a little bit later. And it is great subtext and subplots continuing on throughout this movie as well. And one of them, which comes back into it in a big way, is that a lot of military and a lot of war is getting automated to be run by machines. And after a while, it's going to be, if you will, outsourced to machines. So humans won't have to deal with it on that level because they're not quick enough and they're probably not smart enough. Sound familiar? Right. Like AI. It's amazing how much things come full circle, and when you're hearing these things now, how familiar the sounds. And again, I guess it's referred to as machines in this movie. So, yeah, very nice setup. And when the disaster element that starts coming into the central movie starts to happen, the movie's done quite a lot of good setup to earn the suspense and earn the thrill and earn the stakes that's about to happen. I would say personally, I didn't so much feel the thrilling aspect of it. I don't know if I meant to. I didn't so much feel the suspense of it for a while as well. I certainly felt the stakes though when watching this, and as the movie got to the latter stage, there is a thrilling aspect to it. So I don't know how much of that I was expecting to feel because of the setup very familiar to me, and how much it's the beginning of this type of movie, or maybe it's not that type of movie at all. I don't know. I'll be interested to ask you about that. Maybe it isn't that, but it's not solely that, I will say. So yeah, at a certain point in this movie, lo and behold, they're not able to give the order to the planes to turn around. So shit literally hits the fan regarding a war happening, because it's really going to cause some problems if they can't get back to go back from the safe point, or fail safe as they call it in the movie. And yeah, this movie is pretty cool in how it executes this, and a lot of its budget constraints at the time in terms of technology, you imagine, but I think they do a very good job, and it brings something to it, where a lot of this takes place in the boardroom. Now we get a few external shots of the planes and whatnot in the sky, and we get a few actual shots that were either miniatures or shot outside. I couldn't really tell, but it does a good job with the effects nonetheless. And there's a movie that came out after Captain Phillips. Can't remember what it's called, but it's a Norwegian film, and it's about hostage negotiation, and it's almost like Captain Phillips if it was just set in the boardroom, which I really liked, and I think you didn't like it as much. Can't remember what that movie is called now, but this movie has that kind of feel to it, where a lot of this movie is people reacting to dots on a screen, and the actors having to pull the heavy weight of reacting to essentially ships disappearing from the screen. And they do a good job with that. And there is some exhilaration to be had from seeing these dots of ships on a screen slowly turning around and trying to catch up to the planes that are going to bomb Moscow. And I did enjoy that, and I did think there was a lot to that, and I did think the actors did a very good job in selling that. And the other thing is, which I liked, actually, do you know what this is like? It's like when you get Air Force One and all these type of movies where it cuts to the shot of the people at base running things, or Apollo 13 where people are the mission control team. This movie is very much set from the mission control team's point of view, minus the action in the heart of it that would normally done by a Tom Cruise character, a Ben Affleck, or a Harrison Ford in the case of Air Force One. So that's probably the best way of putting it. But I found a lot of joy in that. And the other thing about that is, because there's so much time spent set around that environment, you kind of get to see a lot of what the perspective would be like of these various people while these events are happening. There's almost a sense of powerlessness to it, which I really liked as well, that I think it captures very well. And it's set up in a way that they're talking a lot how machines are going to take over people's roles, and we're going to take out the human aspect of it. There's a few scenes or one particular scene spent with the pilots early on, where they say a lot of these new guys are very automated and you don't get to know their personality, and they're very good at following orders. So there is the kind of sense in this movie that even though this movie talks about machines replacing people's roles and stuff, there is a big aspect to this movie that even if you're a human, war turns you into a machine and takes away a lot of your humanity, even on the very basic level, which I thought was very good and very subtly done. It's done. It chips away at the characters in this over time, and before you know it, they have to make really heartbreaking decisions that you don't really see coming. I don't know if it's the safety of American movies where you don't think that things are going to quite go this way. Henry Fonda is another important aspect to this movie. He plays the president, and again, in these movies that would come later, we get a few scenes with Mr. President. In a way, the president in this serves as the typical action archetype in making all the ballsy decisions, except it's done from a room over a phone. Well, I think JR from Dallas as his translator with Moscow, talking to the other generals. And I enjoyed probably that aspect the most, where we get these scenes where we only really see the president of the United States, and we hear the voice of the Russian general. In fact, we don't even hear the Russian voice. We hear the translation of the Russian general. I just realized as I'm saying this to you. And there's a almost cat and mouse trust issue game as well going on between the president of Russia and the president of the United States, where they're both being hounded by their generals, and even they can't make a decision with the full weight of their convictions, where it's set aside the fact that, yeah, I trust you, I kind of believe what you're saying, I kind of believe that this is an accident, that your planes are missing an order and they are going to bomb Moscow by mistake. However, Russia can't let that stand, and there's that type of inevitability of war, that type of aspect of it as well. And there's a facelessness to war very much in this movie, down to the war board screen, down to the facelessness that we see on the phone, and the generals that are talking to other generals. We don't really see a lot of the opposition. We only get a picture of the general in one scene where there's another one of the generals is talking on the phone, and we finally get a picture of the Russian general, and that puts a face to the person, and it's a really low-key, powerful scene. And the movie really ratcheted it up in ways that you don't expect in the final bit. But maybe some of the reason why I wasn't finding this thrilling was that I was expecting it to be okay. And in the absence of any action choreography solving the problem, it puts you into a sense of false security at times, where, well, I'm not going to get the big blockbuster scene where this plane gets shot out of the sky. We're not going to, it almost feels like insert scene here in terms of what we're used to with action movies. So then you realize, hold on, is there a chance in this that the Americans are going to make it all the way to Russia and bomb Moscow? And once you realize that, there's a ticking time bomb, no pun intended, sense to this movie, where things really start kicking off, and you start to feel the impending doom that everyone else has been feeling for a lot of the movie. And again, the central theme and ideas of the movie that they've been slowly chipping away at you with coming to the forefront. The scenes where they finally get through to the pilot, the president gets through to the pilot, and he tells him to stop. The pilot isn't going to stop because that's in his training. It's in his training not to listen to voices. They get his own wife on the phone, and he's ignoring her wife like she doesn't exist because he is so conditioned to the mission that it doesn't make a difference. There is no human there. He might as well be a machine. The humanity is stripped away, and the very final 20, 30 minutes of this movie is extremely powerful. And then the guy we see early on in the movie, in the opening scene, played by Dan O'Hurley, an Irishman, I think his name was Blackie, Captain Black. He's tasked by the president to do something unfathomable. Wow. There's like a scene where someone's jaw gets fucking caught. He in the absence of me being able to pronounce this word right now, he's asked to do something that you do not see coming in the slightest. So the president's plan, in order to even the scales, should USA get to Moscow and bomb them by mistake, is the president of the United States is to authorize a bomb on New York, so it's basically cancels it out. And that is quite a decision for a president to make in any movie, especially in a movie in 1963 where the Cold War is actually happening. And it just points to the crazy logic of war. But what it also does is, a lot of this movie, as I said, it's faceless victims, faceless consequences, faceless war. But when you see people having to bomb their own country, and we bring the humanity back into it from the character's point of view, where the colonel is asked to drop the bomb on the city where his wife is. He's doing it because that's the mission. The president gives the order when the first lady is going to be visiting New York at the time. And some of the commanders are like, oh, do you think he knows that? And then they respond, yeah, he knows. He knows all right. And that is just gripping stuff in the final bit of this movie. And I thought they did a really good job at the end as well, where they do a series of really quick freeze frames or still frames in order to show the bombing on New York without actually showing it. It's just people's lives that stop because they're dead in an instant. And that was really powerful as well. So, a lot to enjoy in this movie. A lot to enjoy in this movie. Hopefully you'll get to it. I'd like to know what you think. Unfathomable. Unfathomable.
Oh, Jesus, man. Okay. So you sent that message a week ago. I had never heard of the movie Failsafe, and I've been real busy. And yeah, got to it this evening. As you said, it was, I think the last movie we had discussed was The Coffee Table, which is one of the most intense movies, I think, speaking for both of us, that we've ever seen. And yeah, this is a real fucking sledgehammer movie. I have had a pretty stressful day. Just full-blown toddler, baby, screaming baby, bringing toddler home in pissing rain, like fully stretched, trying to get everything done. And yeah, just everything going on and on and on in terms of like trying to just keep shit together in the house. At the end of the day, like fully spent, fully like just ready to collapse on the couch. I was like, And Andrew sent me this fucking voice message a week ago. Let me get to this movie. And not that I necessarily thought it was going to be some sort of fun romp or something. I really had no idea what it was, but I kind of, I don't know. I guess I wasn't prepared, and the early scenes of the movie didn't prepare me. I mean, it's a unique film. So yeah, I guess early in the film, one weird thing about this film is it's got no music in it, and that's a very specific choice, which creates a very specific outcome. I think the music would have made it more of an escapist sort of thing, more of a fake Hollywood sort of thing, but it has a really cold, almost documentary-like vibe, especially in the early scenes where it's just sort of setting the stage, establishing our ensemble, both an ensemble of characters, but also an ensemble of locations and situations. And in those early scenes, as one does when one's watching a film that they have no idea or no context for, I was trying to pin down, what is this film? One of the names mentioned in the opening credits is Henry Fonda as the president. So that's a bit of a spoiler in the sense of like, okay, we're seeing this person, that person. We know that the president's going to be involved. I'm assuming then this is about some sort of political incident. But my mind was kind of going down the sort of Manchurian Candidate thriller, like, not a sort of a social or political commentary, and more of just like a fun thriller type thing. I think one of the early indicators of that was the girl that Mathau meets at the party. I presumed she was a spy, there was going to be something done either by the Russians or whoever that to attempt some big takeover of the country or something, and the movie was called Fail Safe because it was just like, they've identified all of these failing points in the US defense system, and so I was tracking that. I was like, okay, they're gently giving us all of these characters and it all seems quite banal, but ultimately this is going to keep ratcheting up in tension over the course of the day, because it starts right at 4 a.m. or something with Blackie getting up in his house. I was like, over the course of this day, it's going to reach, it's going to turn into this really thrilling kind of thing. And, unknowingly I was right, but I was completely wrong about what the film is. It's a much more realistic film. Not an entirely realistic film, but it's a much more realistic film than the Manchurian Candidate type thing that I had in my mind. I was thinking, like Bourne Identity, just like, some completely far-fetched scenario. And it's an interesting experience. You mentioned the film opens with a dream sequence, and it's a very stylized dream sequence. And it's one of a few things in this film where they use very low-tech resources, because I presume they didn't have the budget, or perhaps just when this film was made, there wasn't really that much you could do other than that. Other examples would be all the stock footage used of the planes in flight, and the as you said, the still shots of New York, instead of a big CGI nuclear bombing of New York at the end. But the film is quite hard to pin down in its opening sort of 15-20 minutes, and then when you settle into okay, we're looking at the big war games board of planes flying around, then you go, all right, okay, now I kind of know what we're doing here. Something is going to go down, and we're going to have to sort of figure out how to deal with this situation. But yeah, it was quite, but up until that point, interesting. And yeah, the film kind of got under my skin. I was quite surprised by all the sort of early twists and turns of character development. Like, for example, Blackie waking up in the morning in his apartment. He spends ages there. Like, we're in that apartment for ages. Him going in, checking on his kids, him and having a little chat with his wife, kind of just pottering about his apartment. I'm like, this is paced weirdly. The not the general, but the guy below the general getting a call from his mother, I presume, that his father is like gone into some sort of drunken rampage and he has to leave and go to her house. The general has to pick him up there, and then that journey in the car afterwards, where the general kind of doesn't know whether to say something, and he's got a lot of empathy. Clearly, the film is right from the beginning kind of doing things that you're not really sure why that's in the movie. Not in a bad way, but like I said, when you're trying to find the movie early on and you're wondering what type of film you're in for, there's a lot going on. Like that female character that I had identified as some sort of Russian spy, she's just nothing. She's just like a girl who wants to hook up with Walter Matthau, and he doesn't, and he takes a very like vicious stance against her and what she represents, the type of woman that she is. And again, that's not really anything to do with the major plot, but it's all character development. And I think that's what eventually that sort of solidifies itself as the movie progresses. You go, okay, one of the major themes in this film is that these massive big political situations, like, or it doesn't matter, the most small scale event, the most large scale event, it all ultimately it comes down to humanity or lack thereof, and character and stuff like that. So of course the film has a focus on that right from the beginning before any kind of major dramatic shit kicks off. I suppose I'll just speak broadly about my opinion on the film, because I think it differs a bit from your own. Sounded like you liked it a lot. I loved it. I thought it was a masterpiece. Like I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and I was unsure of it for the first sort of 15 minutes or so. But when I kind of clicked into a groove with it, and sometimes when I watch older films, it takes me a while to click into a groove, because I'm less like, I think if I popped out of the cinema in 1964 when this came out, I probably wouldn't have that adjustment period, because I probably would have seen a few films recently that, you know, had like a similar cinematic language. And because I say that because now when I watch a contemporary film, I almost always just click straight into like, okay, I know what we're doing here. I know this type of movie. But this one, yeah, was a little bit rudderless at the beginning, you know, interested and liking what I was seeing, but unconvinced. But as soon as I clicked into that groove, this film just went from strength to strength for me. I think the big difference for me, and like I said, it might be because I've had a bit of a stressful day, or who knows what it is, but I found this film incredibly thrilling. You sort of identified that the film was trying to thrill you, but it didn't quite get there for you. Whereas I was like nail-biting, edge of my seat pretty much the whole way through this film, from as soon as we get into that war room, or that, you know, whatever that room is in Omaha, Nebraska. Yeah, Captain Phillips level, like just everything the film did to ratchet up the tension, and every single event along the way was just nail-biting stuff. And as you said, we're not seeing, you know, James Bond working his way up a plane, like picking off bad guys or something. This is all people looking up at a screen. I was actually wondering what technology was used to create those graphics, because if those visuals we're seeing up on the board are computer generated imagery, like some early vector graphic stuff. And I don't know if they are. It could just be like stop motion animation or who knows what it is. But if it is CGI, it might be one of the earliest examples of that in cinema. It's certainly one of the earliest examples of a film about computers and computing that I can think of. Of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey would have come out around this time, a little bit later, I think. Maybe 5 years later, was it? That is all about AI and computers and stuff, but that's more it's science fiction, it's hypothesizing, whereas this is, taking stock of the place of computers in the present day. And so in that regard, it's surely one of the earliest, certainly one of the earliest masterpieces of that theme. And as you said, it's interesting now, today, with the constant fixation on AI taking over computers, getting rid of people, replacing people with computers. And they say so many things in this movie, like the pilots in their kind of rec room before they go out are like, pretty soon these planes will be going up without anyone in them. And of course now we got like drones and all that. And we've basically, like, pretty soon we'll be on a full century of feeling like we're on the cusp of humans becoming completely redundant. Now that this film couldn't really have known that, but it is interesting to see so much of the same type of discussion happening here in this movie that happens today. But yeah, the film worked for me in a massive way, and it evoked a few films, certainly 12 Angry Men. I think Henry Fonda's presence definitely is a part of that, but beyond that, I can't think of many other films that do that 12 Angry Men thing of like, we've got a very difficult, very serious life or death situation here, and we're going to represent all of the different viewpoints and arguments that like people in society, i.e. the viewing public of the film, would make, and we're just going to hash it out, and everyone's going to, with not a huge amount of time on their hands, everyone's going to try and convince the other person that we need to do this. And they've turned the stakes up from one. I guess the prisoner in 12 Angry Men is probably going to get the death penalty, right? So it is a life or death call, but in this case it's the life and death of possibly everyone in the world that's being sort of strategized and debated. It is fascinating, and certainly we still live in a world where humans have nuclear weapons, and much more powerful nuclear weapons than they had at the time of this film. So that concept of debating whether or not they should be used is something that we don't really want to think about that on a day-to-day basis, but there are people who are having to have those conversations. And I'm sure, with the current situation with Russia, for example, that what we see in the opening 20 minutes of this film, where it's like, it's just business as usual, it's false alarm, but we make sure we go here and we do this, and we got all our routine stuff that we need to be doing. Like, I'm sure that's going on every day. So there are people who are like, even in the banal sense, waking up every day and just sort of like touching the fringes of nuclear conflict. There's a few things in this film, but didn't ring true to me. Now, of course, I'm completely removed from these environments, these strategies, and the people, so I can't say. But the idea that throughout the Cold War, there was constantly a whole load of planes in flight at all times, armed with nuclear warheads, like fairly close to Russia's borders, doesn't sound true to me, but maybe it is. Probably something that's possible to find out. And the other big leap of logic, I suppose, is the idea that the US president would bomb New York as a sort of like, let's just zero it out. Okay, we fucked up. We've destroyed Moscow. We're going to bomb New York, and then we can get back to like even Stevens. As much as that is very logical and very, you can certainly make the argument that that's the only way out of that situation, because if he doesn't bomb New York, well, the Russians are just going to bomb New York, and then they're just going to keep on bombing each other in every city in both. The whole world's fucked. So it is on a logical level, it's completely sound, but on a real world, American politics, even just the idea of the president being able to pull that off on like without some sort of coup or overthrowing, or just the fact that the president would do that in the first place, it didn't ring true to me. I don't think it has to ring true to me. I don't think the film is reliant on you thinking that everything in it is realistic. The film is so much more interesting than, is this a perfectly accurate, realistic depiction of anything? I'm just noting that as a couple of things that stood out for me, where almost everything this film plays out very realistically. I've taken some notes on some of the stuff that you've mentioned there in your voice notes, so I'll kind of run through that. You mentioned that the film manages to sort of plunge you back into that Cold War anxiety that you always hear about it. Oh, we thought we were going to be bombed all the time. We thought nuclear war was about to break out any moment. We thought the Russians were about to be, marching into town any day, and like this film definitely gets you there, or certainly got me there very quickly. I mean, I've also seen a lot of films, and I guess I've met a lot of people and stuff that have backed up that narrative. So it's not, this film isn't having to sort of establish that whole narrative from the ground up. It's familiar territory to me, but I think this film is a great, just in the way that I think the film really benefits from the opening 20 minutes, which is sort of the status quo of them going about their business. And it's like nuclear war is, or the threat of nuclear war is the day-to-day business and lives of these people, whether it's academically pontificating on it, like Mathau's character, or whether it's like dreading it, like Blackie, where he's almost having this kind of like morbid, surrealist nightmares about it, and it's playing out for everyone in a different way. But I think giving you that, look, this is the way we're living, before they plunge you into the incident, helps enormously. The films that it reminded me of, and I kind of kept on having these same films run through my head. One was 12 Angry Men. Like I said, I think it's just all of the debating is very 12 Angry Men. Obviously, it's same director, same actor. Well, one of the actors is from 12 Angry Men. Dr. Strangelove is, like early in the film, when I felt that it wasn't going to be a thriller. It's like, oh, this is non-comedy Doctor Strangelove. And in a way, Doctor Strangelove is kind of non-comedy Doctor Strangelove, because the non-comedic elements of Doctor Strangelove are so powerful that it sort of does the job of failsafe, even though it's a comedy, and it's a hilarious black comedy, but it also manages to be like a really arresting drama. However, this gives Doctor Strangelove a run for its money in this subject matter, I think, which is a bold claim, and I adore Kubrick, and it's been a while since I've seen Strangelove, and I think just on a kind of beauty of film level, this film isn't quite there. Although I do find it to be quite a attractive film. I mean, I love the high contrast black and white photography. There's so much of this film looks gorgeous, but I think it's also part of that for me is like nostalgia for just seeing the way film was shot back then. I think the Doctor Strangelove is on another level visually than this. But yeah, the other film that came to mind a lot was Dunkirk. And I think they're both films that are set in a bunch of different places, all sort of pertinent to the same situation, but we're going here, we're going there, we're seeing it from this perspective, that perspective, we're getting boots in the ground, we're getting conversation, think remote from it, and it's all in aid of ratchet up the tension more. Now go over here, ratchet up the tension more. Now go over here and see what they're talking about, and it's getting more intense. I am a huge fan of Dunkirk. I know it's a very highly praised film. I think over the years of seeing Dunkirk be like increasingly revered, I would say, I have had more and more sort of complaints and misgivings about it. And I feel like watching this film now just almost like crystallizes the issues I have with Dunkirk. For starters, I assume that failsafe was an influence on Dunkirk. Putting it kindly, I would probably say that Nolan has lifted wholesale from this movie for Dunkirk. But forgetting about that, this film just doesn't fall foul of any of the issues. For starters, one of the major issues of Dunkirk is just a Nolan issue, is the fact that he's turned it into one of his puzzle box things by having it all like a weird time organization thing where things are happening at different times and speeds and lining up in surprising ways. And it's just like massively distracting from what should be like quite a direct linear type of film. But also, everything in this film works so harmoniously together, even though you're seeing very different types of events happen. And in Dunkirk, I just think that it's much more muddled. It has much less of a specific point of view. Like you said quite well, that this film is like a discussion on humanity, the erasure of humanity when it comes to war, conflict, machines, and then just humanity in general. I think like so much of what you see in this film is just an absolutely fascinating dissection of humanity, and like the conversations with the Russian premier, both the Russian premier, who you can barely hear on the other side of the phone, but you have him translated, and the US president, both performances or characters that are brimming with humanity, as is the translator, as is like all of the key people in the war room, as are the other Russians that we hear on the other end of the phone, the pilot's wife. Everyone in this film is so gushing with humanity. And if you just sort of watch this film on mute, or you watch like the trailer for it, you just heard about it or something, you took like the most superficial glance at it, you might think that it's just like completely stoic, boring, talky, technical jargon movie or something, but it is one of the most human films. It's almost like watching It's a Wonderful Life or something, and how much it's just like raw humanity on screen. And I thought that worked really, really well. I think the sort of Rise of the Machines type of narrative, and that kind of like we've given over things that were important, that should have been human important things, to something to the machines or to computers or to protocol or to obedience to doctrine or whatever, is very interesting. I'm sure I'll be kind of ruminating on this over the coming days. Another interesting thing is you said that it's a film with no bad guys. I would say, like, bad guy is too reductive a phrase for this film, but I do think that there is a bad guy in this film in a way, and that's Walter Matthau. And the case I'd make for that is he is the one person in this film, from my appraisal of it anyway, who's lost his humanity. Everyone else, from the Russians to the Americans, at every level, people who feel one way, people who feel another way, they're all operating from an emotional human standpoint. And Matthau, who we get the impression has like become completely jaded and like disillusioned from that kind of empathy and compassion from World War II, has lost that, and he is now a calculator. He is now a pure strategic, just does not care. He only wants victory, or, you know, like when it becomes clear that New York's about to be bombed, all of the other guys in the room that he's in are basically just like crumpled up messes, and he's like running the tally on like where the documents of the corporations are. And it's not like a bad guy in terms of like he's like some like mustache twisting villain, but in terms of the film's theme of be like humanity being this magical, sacred, gorgeous, wonderful, spiritual thing, he's the character right from when we meet him to all the way through the film, who is like a demonstration of living without that spark. And it's dead in him, and it's like, will it die in the world or will it survive? So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, just like looking through some more of the notes that I've made from what you were saying to see if there's anything I haven't covered here. Yeah, I think I've pretty much gone over everything. As I said, I'll be sort of chewing over this film over the coming days, but it really had me in a vice grip, and right up to the end, which, you know, it's interesting because it's a similar ending to Dr. Strangelove, but this is such a more serious and intense film, and it's kind of got that uncut gems type thing of like, once we got you, like once shit hits the fan and things start to go bad, we're not dropping the tension. Like it's gonna keep getting worse and worse, and there's like the filmmakers are never going to like go, and it's all okay and everything's fine. Like, it's like, no, this is serious fucking business. And it's a very, very intense film. The opening scene, or the opening kind of matador fight dream sequence thing, which is like visually crazy and overstimulating, and then it switches into the title card fail saving, and it flashes black and white, almost like strobing effect briefly, and then goes into Blackie waking up. I turned to my wife and I was like, very arty. And when we get to the end, like you said, it's the shots of New York and the noise, and then it just like bam, cuts to black, credits start crawling up. It's like, holy shit. The film is so aggressive in certain points, and certainly in its ending, even on a like title design or like a real editing and sound design level. It's brutal. So yeah, masterpiece film. I had a quick look on Wikipedia there, and I noticed that it was remade, or rather the novel was adapted again as a live television play. So in other words, a play not on a stage with an audience, but a play on TV, but broadcast live, directed by Stephen Frears, starring George Clooney. I think this is a film that is due for a remake, and not a remake in the Cold War, but a remake set maybe in a future war, or, you know, I'm not talking sci-fi future, but I'm talking like, you know, a couple of years from now, some sort of like NATO, Russia thing. It's like this film came out at the peak of this anxiety that people were having, and certainly the film in that closing monologue by Henry Fonda of how we've built this up, we've got us to this point where only we can disband this, and we have to reverse the course that was brought us here. As we know, the course has only continued and become way more precarious, in the sense that there's just much more nations that have nuclear weaponry now. So I think, yeah, you could certainly make this film again. I suppose we haven't reached that anxiety point of the Cold War, but it would just be interesting to see how you'd handle this film now, because the thing that seems to cause it, although there is some ambiguity left, but the thing that seems to cause it is like a mechanical failure of some of the circuitry of the computing system that manages the fail-safe protocol. Now you would assume that things are more sophisticated and it would be hard for that type of thing to happen. But yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see, even just on like a security level, of how this world operates now. It's quite a detail-orientated film, so I think there would be reason to update it. And yeah, another little tidbit is 12 Angry Men. I was unaware of this, but it was Sidney Lumet's first film. And then this film comes out, I think, 7 years later. And nowadays, 7 years later, 7 years after your debut, can very often mean your second film coming out. You know, you bring out your debut film, it's a small little, you know, release, it does festivals, and then it eventually goes wider, and you get your status built up, and then you move on to your second project, and then that collapses halfway through development, and it's a few stop-start things, and finally, you know, you have a bit of a slow start, and you come out with your second movie, and you know, you can see that sometimes taking 7 years to accomplish. This is Sidney Lumet's 8th film, so he's so far into his career. 8 films now is an entire filmography for directors. So yeah, they were really churning them out back then. And I thought, you know, I've seen a few of his films, but I definitely need to become more studied in his work. As you said, like there's the films like Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon that everybody knows, and then there's the films that just don't stand the test of time in terms of being continuously part of the conversation. I'm sure there's certain people who think and talk about failsafe quite regularly, but they must be like, you know, more learned film buffs than us, because I hadn't really heard of this film. I'm sure I've heard it mentioned in passing, but it hasn't stuck in my head. And it does make me wonder how many gems he has, like how many films are in his filmography. When I see a film like this, I'm always tempted to go, well, let's just watch the next film he put out. Let's just, if this is this good, surely the film he made directly before this, directly after this, is going to be pretty, well worth watching. But at the same time, when you're cranking out movies at the rate that he was, realistically, are they all going to be incredible? So as much as I'm drawn into checking out more of his work, I'm also a bit intimidated by any director that has a really, really prolific catalogue. So yeah, I do feel like I need to check out something else. So let me know if you're down for some more Sidney Lumet, and if you have a particular movie that you're looking to hit next. But yeah, great movie. Looking forward to dwelling on it and learning a little bit about behind the scenes and stuff like that over the coming days.
Hey man, just had my morning coffee and my croissant of sanity, as I call it, to your voice note about Failsafe. Really glad you loved it. I really liked it. You loved it. That's 2 for 2 as far as I'm concerned. I like the way you're living on the edge after a stressful day of parenting and running through the rain, and the movie you pick at the end of your day and potentially the end of your tether, because there's 2 choices I give you between Twilight of the Warrior, feel good, fun, and then Failsafe, which will break you. And you chose Failsafe, my friend. But seems like it worked out for you in the end. Yeah, it's interesting hearing your conversation and your thoughts about the movie, especially a week removed. And some of the things that I've been ruminating on, and some of the things that I've totally forgot, and hearing you interpret the movie from a slightly different perspective and slightly different critique, it was a good voice note to listen to. And just a few things that you mentioned to begin with. So you mentioned that it was unbelievable to you that there'd be all these planes flying around constantly during the Cold War. Apparently that's exactly what happened. There's an operation, look it up, called Operation Chrome Dome, they have a picture of the map as well, so it'll show you the areas where these planes were. So there was constantly planes flying up in the air equipped with thermonuclear missiles in the sky at all times from 1961 to 1968, ready to fire and go into Moscow on a moment's notice. Now, that's pretty scary, and it's no wonder one didn't fall into the sea or malfunction or whatnot. So there's that. And the second thing, I had wondered about the animation as well, and perhaps I know you do a thing called Animation April every April, funnily enough, where you watch 30 animated movies. So maybe you'll be able to make sense of this more than me, and you'll have certainly more information about the history of animation. So apparently this was completely hand-drawn and animated by hand. The boardroom scenes and the quote-unquote special effects. I mean, there's no quote-unquote necessary, actually, because they are special effects. So that was animated by hand. It's really cool what people do in a limited space of budget and a limited space of technology at the time in terms of filmmaking, that you find a way around your limitations by giving us something like this that massively enhances the movie and is almost one of the things that makes the movie so unique. And I really like what you said about no matter, well, I'm going to misquote you, even though I really like what you said. You said that no matter how much technology is used and machines or whatever, it always comes down to people. That's a really good point as well. And if you think about it, the people are constantly looking at a machine in order to get their information, in order to get their feedback. So I mentioned as well that it's about people losing their humanity and putting it over to technology and machines. Well, there's almost an augmentation to technology in their life in this movie anyway. Right down to the board they're looking at, right down to how they're getting orders. It's almost like technology's augmented their brains so much that they're okay with losing the humanity and almost subletting the humanity to machines. There was this thing actually there's a movie about it called Experimenter with our man Peter Sarsgaard. And it's about how people were okay to follow orders from other people because they didn't feel responsible. They're just following orders, man, just following orders. And there's probably something attractive to subletting your humanity and subletting your thoughts even to machines. It must be the ultimate version of just leaving your individuality and your emotions at the door. Instead of following orders, you're just following a machine. Don't even need to follow orders now. This is just all set up by machines. So I thought that aspect was really good as well. I didn't like Doctor Strangelove, funnily enough. I'll need to rewatch it again because it's a long time ago. But something you may or may not know as well is that both Doctor Strangelove and Failsafe come out in a few months of each other the same year. So it's almost like if Spaceballs and Star Wars come out the same year. And obviously this is spoofing a very general topic in Doctor Strangelove. And I think I might be wrong on this, but I think the novel got sued by the author of Doctor Strangelove as well, the writer of Failsafe, because they were so similar. But apparently anyway, Stanley Kubrick insisted that Doctor Strangelove comes out first, and then Failsafe didn't do very well upon release because audiences couldn't take it seriously after watching Doctor Strangelove first. And it is a bit like that. It is a bit like watching Hot Shots and then watching Rambo or whichever one. Maybe it's Hot Shots Part 2. It would be very hard. And there's even things that I've had like that where The Simpsons give me that reference first, like Cape Fear, and then I watch Cape Fear and I'm thinking Sideshow Bob. So it is a shame, and maybe that is one reason why the movie was forgotten, because it just came out at the wrong time, the wrong summer or whenever exactly it was. So the timing of that was very unfortunate. And you mentioned that the other thing you found realistic, or unrealistic, should I say, is the president. I also agree with you, but like you said, well, I agree and I disagree. I probably couldn't see the president seeing it through in terms of a coup and things like that. But like you say, it's not really about that. And movies sometimes about playing out ideas and playing out philosophical conversations in a genre sometimes, or in a story. So you don't necessarily have to go into that conversation whether he would do it or not, nor do I particularly need to. But what is fascinating thought for conversation is that that was an idea in the first place, and that it turns the casualties of war on yourself. And it's almost like if you put your people in a position of getting harmed or getting killed, and you're doing that in the aim of conquering an enemy, or in the patriotic jargon of being there for your country, but at the same time there's an oppositional force that isn't from your country, so there's you and the other. So in a way, it makes all these pointless deaths all right in some people's minds. But what was so shocking about this movie is that when we get that scene where the president decides to turn a bomb on New York, it's exactly the same thing as sending your troops up to get killed or civilians getting caught in a conflict from the enemy. It's the exact same thing as the Russians feeling when Americans drop a bomb on them, except one is the enemy and one is yourself. And why does it make it better when it comes from an enemy? Why are people so almost immune to the casualties of it? But the other thing that is really food for thought as well, and you mentioned, I had a similar experience, but you mentioned that early on you don't really know where the movie's going. And if we're watching a movie today, we have about 4 points of screenplay when we're like, okay, it's going to be this movie. Oh, okay, right. We already know that this, and it's so hand holding, maybe. And maybe there's a reason for that, because if audiences are watching a movie, they want to know where they are, or else they're not going to really listen to what's going on. And early on, I really liked what was set up as well, where you see all the various people going about their business, and it does really help in the character development. That's a very good word to use that you used. And with Henry Fonda, I really like the black and white and the low angles while he's making these decisions and talking on the phone. But the point I'm making is that now that we know where the movie went and how it ended up, going from our early impressions and going from things like that, it's fascinating to think that the characters had prior knowledge and prior drills and prior formulas and prior commands for scenarios that would be in place should this happen. So it's interesting to think when Henry Fonda is on the phone and he's negotiating with the Russian president, and they're trying to avoid an incident, and they're trying to calm things, and they're trying to sort out a resolution. It's very interesting to think that in his mind, Henry Fonda either has the protocol or he's formulating a plan. What I'm going to have to potentially do is drop a bomb on my own country in order to prevent a full-on scale nuclear war. So now when I'm thinking back in my mind's eye of all these scenes and what was to come, it adds so many layers to the pressure and the tenseness that the characters are under in every scene. And like you said, you found it thrilling very early on. I found it thrilling from the very latter stages. I wouldn't be inclined to watch this movie straight away. But in 10 years, if I give this movie a revisit and knowing the level of stress of the decisions that they're trying to avoid, that I wouldn't even know was coming in my first watch, it would just add so much more to the character performances and so much more to the stakes of the characters and the decisions they're trying to make, or more importantly, not trying to make. You mentioned Blackie, and we spend a lot of time with him in his family home, and he gets up in the morning, and I think it's been a week now, but does he spend a little time with his kid? Does he even have a kid? I can't remember at this stage, but I know goes into his wife's bedroom and he has a talk with her, and obviously he's had a nightmare, and maybe it's, in retrospect, he's spending a lot of time there because he knows that at any time this type of thing can hit the fan. So he is having nightmares and he is really being affected because he knows about the weight of things that could potentially come at any minute. And obviously a lot of these people are going about their daily lives and it seems like just another day. But what's also fascinating from a character point of view, these people are going about their everyday at the higher echelons of government with immense pressure while trying to function as members of society and while trying to function as a family man, a dad, a son of a drunken dad, very kitchen sink issues as well. But these people also are in charge of the most high profile job you can have. Now, I remember the line I used, I don't think there's any bad guys, just bad ideas in this movie. And you brought up Walter Matthau. I can certainly see why you have that feeling, and especially from your perspective, you're probably a lot more humanist and empathetic than me. Not that I'm some cold-hearted individual, but it is interesting that you would pinpoint that character as a bad guy. Now, we won't get into a conversation of, oh, bad guy, how much of a bad guy in what sense, but you've identified why you think his traits are more, shall we say, negative and destructive than anyone else's in this movie. And I'll give you the reasons why I disagree with that. And I think, and this is, I'm not sure if it's controversial, I'm not sure if it's, I don't know, let's see. So I think you need the pragmatist. You need someone like him as part of the conversation and as part of the balance. You do need someone who's, is it a utilitarian argument where I'd rather save this many lives instead of this many lives because I can save 100 people or 1 million people. Of course I'm going to save 1 million people. I think people who can make those decisions are needed, and I think people who can see the statistics of that and make the clarity of that decision are important in any room and in any conversation. However, it needs to be balanced with the other view, with the humanist approach with every life matters, but that doesn't have to come from that person. That other person just needs to be in the room. Because it could be argued that the soldier who has a breakdown and tries to overthrow his commander acts that way because his personal life, and he's not able to control his humanity. His dad is drunk. He leaves his house setting off with a very bad day. And because he can't control his humanity, because the stakes are too high, he ends up doing a crazy decision and acts too much on his humanity. And I think that's what I found genius about this movie personally. I think even though this movie is saying you need your humanity, at the same time, you also need your pragmatism, and you need those things to balance each other out. You need those things to work with each other. You don't need machines to take over every decision a human makes. You need humans to work with machines. And I think the machine aspect is also represented in the Walter Matthau character. But people need to work with those people. And I think people's humanity does interfere with the judgment in a bad way in this movie as well, because they can't function so much with the stress of things. So that's my thought on that anyway. But the other thing is, just getting back to the Blackie character, maybe he's having those crazy dreams. Maybe he's spending time with his wife because he knows he's the type of man that will drop a bomb on his family and his country in order for the greater good to continue, so to speak, if you want to look at it that way, the most logical decision. And again, the president makes a very logical decision in a similar way that the Walter Matthau character would. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on it. I would very much be up for seeing what else Sidney Lumet's got in his locker. And again, yeah, I'm really glad you enjoyed it, because the last thing I wanted was you having to watch a movie that I've recommended and sent you a voice note on late at night and it being an absolute stinker fest. So really glad that you loved it and can add that to some of the films you feel very fondly about.
Hey man, so it's the next day now. Had a little bit more time to think about the movie. Yeah, you raised a lot of good points. I think this is a classic film where you can talk about the film a lot and you can talk about the real world a lot, prompted by the film, which I always love. I always love when you see a film and you're like, I had a great time with that film and I want to talk about that film, but I also want to talk about life and, you know, the world we live in, because that film has made me think about things and has raised questions for me and has maybe like prompted me to reassess some of my assumptions or whatever. That's always a very powerful thing that a film can do. Not every film has to do it, of course. You know, you don't necessarily need that out of a James Bond movie, but when a film does kind of push you to dig a little deeper into your philosophies, it's always welcome. Now, just to clarify, I didn't get to the end of a long, stressful day and then decide, oh, I fancy watching a Cold War nuclear standoff drama. I had no idea what this film was. And you've sent me a few movies recently. You sent me the name of the movie and I haven't looked them up. I haven't kind of done any checking. I'm just like, if Andrew's saying it's worth watching, then it's worth watching. Because especially with contemporary movies, it's so rare that we get to see something with zero context. And I kind of feel like all films are designed around having zero context, unless they're a franchise sequel or something. But by and large, even the films that we get to, having seen 100 trailers for and viral videos and like nonstop ongoing narrative and PR stuff, when you actually get down to the film itself, that 90 minutes or 2 hours that you're sat there with, it has been crafted in such a way that it strongly benefits from knowing nothing, to whatever extent it is even a good film in the first place. Now, this film, I knew it was called Failsafe, which, you know, suggests, I guess, to me that like there's some sort of like high stakes, stressful situation. I didn't know if it was going to be like a heist movie. Could even have been like a relationship drama. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or something? You know, Failsafe could be sort of interpreted in a million different ways, but it definitely seemed like you know, if the word failsafe implies the presence of some sort of failure. So I had that, but had nothing else, and definitely wasn't prepared for quite the level of intensity and like horrific implications on screen than I ultimately got. You mentioned there this Operation Chrome Dome, that this actually existed, that there was for years shitloads of planes flying around with nuclear warheads. I mean, that is absolutely terrifying. I'm obviously no nuclear physicist, but I'm assuming if one of them had crashed, it would have been disastrous. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe the plane running out of fuel or you know, a bird flying into its engine and crashing actually doesn't cause a nuclear explosion. I mean, I hope it doesn't, because if it does, then that was horrifically irresponsible. But anyway, who knows what's happening now? And we've seen a lot of these movies like Hunt for Red October and stuff like that, where you got like a submarine with nukes on it, or a ship with nukes on it. I suppose, yeah, there's probably a lot of nukes that are just like a few buttons being pressed away from launching. And, you know, I'm sure they're taking a lot of precautions to ensure that that doesn't happen accidentally, but still, you know, humans have constantly fucked up and made mistakes throughout history. So anyway, it doesn't really bear thinking about. There's not much I can do to change that. The thing at the end of the movie, the president's decision to sort of trade casualties and go, look, you're losing Moscow, I'm losing New York. It's very interesting. It's fascinating. I disagree that this is something that was on his mind from the get-go, that this is something that was a planned protocol. You're saying that if you rewatch the film in 10 years, knowing that he's walking through this entire movie sort of considering, I might have to destroy or kill my own family and millions of my own citizens. I don't think that's my read on the film at all. I look at this film as them having run through every protocol except for this, that they're completely blindsided by a computer failure that on this level, and they had planned for what if we decide to attack, what if they attack and we retaliate, what if they attack too quickly and we didn't attack in time, all of the human decision stuff. But I don't think that they had planned for what if we attack unintentionally. And so to me, it is a mad scramble of like, what do we do in this situation? They have to kind of make it up on the fly. I think the decision that he ultimately comes to is kind of one of these where like insanity meets genius. Like, okay, pragmatically speaking, if we choose to follow on this accidental attack on Moscow with more attacks on Russia, like we're clicking into war now, they'll you know, respond and they'll bomb everywhere in America and everyone in Russia and America is dead. Or I can try and draw a line in the sand right here and zero this out. And it's definitely not going to be achieved by just saying, I mean, he does say in the movie, I wonder, would you accept the sentiment, accept my gesture of like, I'm willing to do this, and then ask me not to do it. And predictably, the Russian premier says, no, I wouldn't take that on good faith, that this was just an accident and you're not going to incur any casualties. Would you in my shoes? And he says no. So he just has to do it. And then it seems that this is the end of the war. Of course, we don't get anything after the bomb. And we know that there's many people in both camps that disagree with the position of their leaders. But at least the impression we get is that like this is going to work, this plan. But yeah, it felt like to me something that was found within the film rather than something that was weighing heavy on his head, like right from when he goes down in that elevator. You sort of push back a bit on my identifying Mathau as the villain of the film, or like the one villain. So just I want to clarify, I don't mean that he's a villain to me. Like, I'm not saying that I consider him a villain because I have identified him within this movie as like the person that doesn't align with my values. I think he's the villain in the film because I think this film is a criticism of the how far away we've got from human compassion. And I think everyone else in this film operates from a place of either compassion, like, you know, I want to save as many lives as possible. I don't want people to get hurt, or they've, like in the case of the pilots, for example, they've been indoctrinated with these orders so effectively that even though the last thing they wanted to do is drop a bomb on Moscow, they're like, we have to do this now. This is us following orders. And, you know, when he gets the call from his wife, he's just not capable of switching. His brain has been so conditioned to ignore all comms, and it's been so hard coded into him that we're seeing here, like, I think what's supposed to be a horrific demonstration of, if we abandon compassion for human life and we go purely off protocol and numbers and just treat everything like maths or war games, then that is a bad thing. That's to me that the film has that position. Whether or not I have that opinion is sort of separate. I think the film is of that opinion, and I think the film feels that Mathau is like someone who has lost he's lost the reverence for human life. He's a way to moving chess pieces around a board. And like in the real world, of course, yeah, I agree. Like you need psychopaths to be running things who don't get emotional. That's why you always say people who are doing surgery, they can't care about whether or not someone dies on an emotional level. They just have to do their work as expertly as possible. And you know, there's many roles in society where like you're hindered by being too sort of sorrowful or emotionally swayed by inevitable hardships, and you have to be more pragmatic. But I think in this film, what the things that the film is criticizing, Mathau is the walking embodiment of all of that to me. I think that is a through line right from the beginning. He's the only person in the film who's never really that emotionally stirred. He's obviously like flabbergasted at what's happening, but he is ultimately he doesn't look at people as humans more than he looks at states of power and victory conditions and stuff like that. It's a different world he's living in, and it's a different worldview he has than everyone else in the movie. There's people in the movie who feel radically opposed to one another, but they're both drawing from the same thing, which is like humanity and the protection of humanity. And ultimately, you say that the president makes a cold, pragmatic decision. I don't think he does at all. I think he is trying to save American lives. That's why he bombs New York. He's trying to prevent the hundreds of millions of people in his country from being killed. And it's just like you said, it's like sending soldiers off to war. You send, thousands of soldiers into Vietnam, or well, that's a bad example, but let's say into Germany, into France in World War II. You obviously are aware as commander-in-chief that an enormous amount of them are going to be killed, but ideally, the thing that you're trying to achieve is a reduction in death, right? And of course, there's plenty of examples of warfare in history where that's not really the agenda. It's more trying to get resources or whatever it might be. But anyway, I think he is a very compassionate and very humanistic individual in the film. So yeah, that to me makes Matthau stand out. But it's interesting, and I think he's a great addition to the film. I mean, I think he's an absolutely incredible addition to the film. It's also the first time I've ever seen Matthau play this kind of like stronger, hard, suave, like kind of cool, at least by Matthau standards, character, because he's usually this like more neurotic, grumpy, sort of, yeah, he's the opposite of this, really. Like here he's kind of got that dangerous sex appeal type vibe. And I think if they were making this film now, the person they would cast, it wouldn't be like a Walter Matthau type, or it certainly wouldn't be what we think of as a Walter Matthau type. But it's great to see an actor I've always liked kind of popping up in a performance that's different to his other work. Yeah, and not much more that I have to add at this point. I think I'm gonna, like I said, dig a little deeper into the background of the film, but really liked it. And again, the look of it, there's lots of nice kind of the hard shadows, the deep blacks. I love that, and I miss that from film. And I also love that these later black and white films that were made in the color era that are, I don't know, they're obviously made on film, and they just have such a rich, deep look to them a lot of the time. And I think that kind of the black and whiteness, and obviously the shades of grey in between, complement the themes and the narrative really well as well, and also kind of tie everything together, the different locations and stuff. So yeah, has a lot going for it. And like you said, more Sidney Lumet. I did check out some of his movies last night on IMDb, and they didn't. I was looking at a few little synopsises, and I was not really drawn to the material. And I thought, if I'd looked at Failsafe on IMDb just randomly a few weeks ago, and it's been like old movie from the 60s about Cold War anxiety, like I don't know if I would have watched it. Like it doesn't have it, when you're watching it, it's like, yeah, it's got an incredible hook, it's an amazing, impossible situation, but just as a sentence, without knowing anything about how good the film is, I didn't feel like there was enough there for me to go in, or I wouldn't have felt, because I didn't have that experience. But now looking at his other films, even after seeing this film, and I've seen quite a few films by him. In fact, I've even seen another film by him in the last couple of months, because we'd watched a bunch of train movies recently, and I watched Murder on the Orient Express, which I, to be fair, wasn't that big of a fan of, but that's another of his. And I've seen other films by him in the past and enjoyed them, but still looking at some of his movies on IMDb, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't feel a massive sense of urgency to go check that out. But I guess I just need to put the work in, because if this film is anything to go by, I think I would be very, very rewarded by doing so.
Hey man, just did a little mini deep dive on Operation Chrome Dome. Won't get into it too much, but just because the movie has brought up this conversation. So very quickly, there was 6 times that there was accidents involving planes. Now I looked up the first 2 and the planes just crashed and malfunctioned, which is astonishing. I haven't gone into all of them, but in the first one I checked, the plane crashed with a nuke, and it was one switch away from blowing up the whole fucking area. And how much of that area, who knows? But if something went off when it crashed, which luckily it didn't, it would have just decimated the entire region, which is a scary prospect. Just getting back to a few things you said there, I definitely would agree that the movie is a critique of Walter Matthau, that Walter Matthau's character, that is not up for debate. So I guess it's just terminology in terms of bad guy or whatever. So we'll stay. I'll stay steer clear of that conversation. But in terms of a critique, yeah, there's definitely a big critique of that type of character. But I feel like the whole movie is such a critique of many different things. So I wouldn't necessarily single him out as a separate critique to anyone else, just more for different reasons. But you're right, he, more than anyone, he probably is more of a personification of that central theme. But the movie does give him and his viewpoint complexities, like it gives everything else a complexity. So there is that factor to it as well. And it's not to say that this protocol was in place or that the decision to bomb New York to appease the Russians wasn't there as a protocol. What I'm saying is the movie is all the more fascinating for me on rewatch because I know where it ended up and I know just what level of stake is at this world. So these people lived nuclear wars. These people, well, the threat of nuclear wars, although in the backdrop of Hiroshima, that is very much on their mind. And the Walter Matthau character actually even says that he considers Hiroshima an act of World War III. So his character already thinks he's in a full-blown conflict, or maybe he actually thinks he's in World War III, which would maybe form the basis of his decision-making as well. But it's just going to be more fascinating to me now, knowing when Blackie wakes up in the morning, he might have considered in some scenario, he might have had to drop a bomb on New York, or he might have to do something absolutely heinous. Think of all the thoughts you have if it's just based on anything. Supposing you're having a little conversation about, I don't know, just the most banal thing around. You're thinking of so many different scenarios. Or, for instance, you're a father at the moment. Well, at the moment, a father for the last few years. You've probably thought of so many different scenarios regarding those kids just because you're living life as a parent. My point is that these people are living with the threat of nuclear war, and they're living with the idea of planes circling around and maybe the fear of things going wrong at all times. So my point is that it's now that I know what this film was prepared to do at the ending, It's really fascinating to me to watch the characters' movements and unfold in rewatch, or even in my mind as I'm playing back the movie. That the level of stress that they're under, and in the president's scenes, yeah, sure, he's thinking of things on the fly, and it mightn't be a protocol, but it might have been something that crossed his head somewhere before. And if not, what part of the conversation in the film we're watching did the thought cross his head while he's having these conversations, while he's doing these negotiatings? Now I'm going to be looking at the man and thinking, God, there's probably a million other things going on in his head. And at what point did he come to this realization, or come to the idea that maybe you would have to do that? And now when these scenes are going on, I'm looking at his face and just looking for signs and looking for moments of when that happened. And same with Blackie. I'm looking at this guy now and I'm thinking, this is a guy who's prepared to do anything. Whether he knew he was going to do that specific thing, that's debatable. But this is a man who wakes up in the morning that knows he's prepared to do everything and anything for his country, including kill his family. So I'm almost reappraising what I've seen based on where the film goes. And it just really stays with you, doesn't it? And I've played the Mass Effect trilogy the last few months and weeks, probably, actually, is more accurate. And the movie the game gives you choices. And I don't feel good about any of those choices in the game. And what I really like what this movie does as well, the choices that are presented for everybody in this movie are terrible choices. None of this is good. There is no good option given in this movie at any time. Shoot down your own plane, yay. Bomb your own country, yay. Send people off to die. These are the only options that's left. That is terrifying. And as much as Walter Matthau, the movie, I agree with you again, is a critique of that viewpoint. Imagine he doesn't actually make any decision in this movie, as far as I remember. He's just got a specific viewpoint. Imagine the people with humanity make the worst decisions in this movie. Obviously, the point is that they've given over that side of them. But imagine Mattau's character is the biggest critique of a viewpoint. But all these other characters who feel a lot, and we have a lot more feeling towards, they end up doing the worst things ever. And that's what's truly shocking about this movie. But yeah, we'll see what we got for Lumet next. Have you seen The Verdict? Because Paul Newman and Sidney Lumet sounds like a good combination for me right now. Oh yeah, that's the other thing I was going to say. Regarding the president, I'm not sure if I used the word that he made a cold-hearted decision. I can't remember if I said that. But a more accurate word is he made a very pragmatic decision. And the Walter Matthau character is really pragmatic. So the point I'm trying to make is sometimes pragmatism is good, I guess. Sometimes having pragmatic reasoning is very good. Although, as I said, this movie doesn't make any decision feel good.
Yeah, I get you. It's that classic thing of like, you know the ending of the film, so you're like, oh Jesus, you wouldn't be thinking this, or oh my God, I know where it's headed for you. You know, like watching Seven and watching the early scenes of Brad Pitt and his life with his wife and everything. It's all going so good. And it's like, hey, yikes. But yeah, it's a great film, and it does. I think the fact that you get that impact on, I mean, for me, I would say I got that impact on everything this film tried to do. It worked on me. And I think that's just like really careful characterization and just the general slow ratcheting up of tension. It's also good that we don't get that much action, like in inverted commas. Like we're almost all observing it from afar, because if you were getting both, then like if you were getting more of the dogfighting type stuff, it wouldn't really, maybe it would unbalance things. But because it's all of the same, like almost every scene in the movie is just like people talking, it's just looking at people's faces while they talk, that allows the tension to sort of ratchet up in an equal way across the board, across all the different environments that it takes place in. I haven't seen The Verdict, but I don't think so anyway. I'm certainly aware of it. And I think, yeah, Sidney Lumet and Paul Newman definitely sounds like a good time. And I believe it's a courtroom drama, if I'm not mistaken, which is one of my favorite subgenres. So yeah, happy to hit that one next. So coming up on October here, as I'm recording this, when I'll be heading to Horror Town for a month. So yeah, maybe squeeze it in before then, or maybe just get to it in the daytime before my daily horror movie.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.